Every species in the galaxy had a rule, unspoken but absolute. Never provoke the humans. Not because they were strongest against, not because they had the biggest fleets, but because of what happened the last time someone tried. 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words, and an entire armada turned to dust in the black silence of space. The old empires still whisper about that day. They still check their scanners twice. Somewhere out there, humanity is still listening. And one day, they might have to say those words again. The UEC survey ship Meridian wasn't looking for a fight. It was mapping dead stars on the edge of neutral space, 300 light-years from the nearest human colony, running on a skeleton crew and a whole lot of coffee. Captain Reyes had logged it as a routine run. Boring, even. The kind of mission you forget by Friday. Then the sensors lit up like a Christmas tree nobody asked for. 7 SEMs dropped out of hyperspace in a tight formation around the Meridian, cutting off every angle of retreat. Their hulls were black and jagged, built for intimidation as much as war. No hail, no warning shot across the bow. Just weapons charging, cold and deliberate, like they already knew how this was going to end. Rise had seen a lot in 20 years of survey work a Euros. Rogue asteroids, ion storms, one very memorable first contact with a species that communicated entirely in color. Nothing in her training covered 7 warships materializing around a research vessel with weapons already hot before a single word was exchanged. Identify yourselves. Reyes barked at comms, buying seconds she didn't have. The answer came in a language the translator struggled to keep up with, clipped and hostile. This is threshold pact territory. You do not belong here. This is neutral space, Reyes shot back. Check your own charts. No response. Just a targeting lock, hard and sudden, straight through the Meridian's shields like they were tissue paper. The first shot took out their engines. The second took out life support on Deck 3. Reyes screamed at her crew to get to the escape pods. But there wasn't time Euros, there was barely time to breathe. In the last 30 seconds before the Meridian went dark for good, her comms officer, a kid barely 2 years out of the academy, did the one thing they drilled into every human crew since the war their grandparents fought. He sent the distress signal. Not a plea, not a surrender. Just coordinates, a timestamp, and 4 words that would reach every coalition ear within the hour. We are still here. Then the Meridian went silent, its hull venting atmosphere in a slow, glittering spiral against the black. 700 light-years away, on a command deck buried under Earth's polar ice, an alert chimed on a console that hadn't blinked red in almost 40 years of Euros, a console most of the junior staff on shift had never once seen active. An old admiral looked up from her coffee, and for the first time in a long time, her hands went cold. Because she knew exactly what that signal meant. Somewhere out in the dark, someone had just made the same mistake their ancestors did. And they didn't know it yet a Euros, but this was only the first spark. Admiral Sarah Voss hadn't slept in the same room as that alert tone since she was a lieutenant, fresh out of flight school, sitting in the wreckage of a war nobody thought humanity would survive. Back then, it was the Korath Dominion. Bigger fleets, older tech, and a plain, simple belief that humans were an infestation to be cleaned up before they spread too far into the stars. For 6 brutal months, the Dominion pushed the coalition back, colony by colony, world by world. Earth's outer defenses fell. Command bunkers went dark one by one. Half the fleet was gone. Morale was gone with it. And then came the Battle of Perch Station a Euro, the last stand, the one they don't just teach in academies, they teach in bedtime stories. Outnumbered 11-1, cut off from resupply, staring down a Dominion flagship the size of a small moon, the coalition fleet had exactly 1 card left to play. Fleet Commander Daniel Cole, a Euro Sarah's mentor. Her friend, the man who taught her everything a Euro, got on an open channel to the entire Dominion armada. He didn't ask for terms. He didn't beg for mercy. He said 3 words that got broadcast, translated, and replayed across 1,000 worlds for the next 4 decades. We don't run. Then he threw every ship he had left straight into the teeth of that flagship. What happened next became legend a Euro, some of it true, some of it exaggerated by campfire retellings a Euro, but the outcome wasn't up for debate. The Dominion broke. Their armada, their pride, their belief that humans would fold under pressure Euros, all of it shattered in one afternoon over a dead moon. Nobody remembers the name of. Every species that heard about it drew the same conclusion. Never, ever push humanity into a corner. It's a bad bet. It's the worst bet in the galaxy. 40 years of peace followed. An uneasy, watchful peace, but peace all the same. Now Sarah Voss stood on that same command deck, staring at a distress signal from the edge of Threshold Pact space, and she understood with total clarity what was about to happen. Somebody out there had never heard the story. Or worse, a Euros, they'd heard it, and they didn't believe it. Either way, she reached for the fleet-wide comm and said the words that would set everything in motion. "Wake up the Vanguard! We're going in!" Half a galaxy away, in a war chamber built into the guts of a hollowed-out asteroid, General Draven Kesh of the Threshold Pact was done listening to fairy tales. His Council A representatives from 6 allied species, all of them nervous, all of them whispering about the old human war, like it was some kind of galactic boogeyman, a Euro, sat around him arguing that provoking humanity was a mistake. "They're a myth built by scared old men," Draven said flatly, slamming a clawed hand on the table. "One battle, 40 years ago, blown up into legend because nobody wants to admit they got lucky. They destroyed a Dominion armada," one counselor pressed, her voice edged with something close to genuine fear. "An entire flagship, gone in a single afternoon. That is not a coincidence, General. That is a pattern, with desperation and a lucky shot," Draven snapped. "I've read every report, I've watched every recording. There's no secret weapon, no hidden fleet. Just a species that got cornered and panicked into a suicide run that happened to work." He wasn't wrong that humans had been desperate. He was dead wrong about everything else arose, and every species that had ever underestimated humanity before him had made the exact same mistake, right up until the moment it cost them everything. Draven had spent 15 years clawing his way up through Pact Command, and he hadn't done it by being cautious. He'd done it by being right when everyone else was scared. And right now, every instinct in his body told him this was an opportunity, not a threat. Humanity's border was thin, undermanned, spread across too many colonies with too few warships. If the Pact moved fast, hit hard, and took territory before the Coalition could organize a real response, they'd have a foothold that would take Earth a generation to push back. The Meridian was a test, he told his council. And it worked. No counterattack, no fleet, just silence. What Draven didn't know a Euro couldn't know yet a Euro was that silence wasn't the same as nothing. Somewhere out past the Pact's border scanners, a Coalition fleet was already burning hard toward New Hendrix, humanity's largest border colony, the obvious next target on anyone's invasion map. Draven smiled at his council, baring teeth built for a harsher world than diplomacy. "Prepare the invasion fleet," he said. "Full force. We take New Hendrix in 72 hours. And we send a message to every species watching. The humans aren't legends, they're just people. And people can be beaten. Somewhere, if ghosts could laugh, Daniel Coles would have. New Hendrix wasn't a military world. It was a farming colony, mostly Euro's golden wheat fields under 3 moons, small towns with names like Millbrook and Ashford. A place where kids rode bikes to school and nobody locked their doors at night. That changed at 0400 local time, when the sky turned the wrong color. Threshold Pact drop ships came down in waves, and the colony's militia, a Euro, a scrappy, underfunded outfit of about 400 volunteers led by a stubborn former Coalition sergeant named Jake Ramirez, a Euro, did the only thing they could. They held the line and prayed the cavalry wasn't too far behind. "Fall back to the ridge!" Jake bellowed over the comm, dragging a wounded volunteer behind a burning transport truck as plasma fire chewed up the wheat field around them. "Fall back, damn it. We're not dying for a grain silo." His radio operator, a 19-year-old named Priya, who should have been finishing college, not holding a rifle, screamed back over the noise. "Sarge, they're not stopping a Euros. They're pushing straight for the town center. Then we make 'em pay for every inch." They fought from grain silos and tool sheds, from behind pickup trucks and porch railings, ordinary people defending an ordinary town with whatever they had on hand. It wasn't strategy. It was stubbornness. Plain and simple, and for 6 long hours, stubbornness was enough. It wasn't heroic in the movie sense. It was messy and terrifying and loud. 400 farmers and shopkeepers with military surplus rifles against an invasion force with real warships in orbit. But they held, barely. Long enough for the evacuation transports to get 8,000 civilians off-world. Long enough for Jake to send one last message up the chain before Millbrook fell. "This is New Hendrix militia to any Coalition ship in range. We are getting overrun. Civilians are clear. We need backup, and we need it yesterday." Up in high orbit, a Threshold Pact battlecruiser watched the smoke rise off the colony with cold satisfaction, logging the successful pacification for General Kesh's report. They didn't know a Coalition fleet had just crossed into the system's outer marker, running silent, running fast with Admiral Sarah Voss on the bridge of the Vanguard, and a look on her face that hadn't been seen in the fleet in 40 years. She keyed the fleet-wide channel. "Jake Ramirez, this is Admiral Voss. Hold on just a little longer." Then, quieter, to her tactical officer. "Bring us in hot. It's time New Hendricks learned we don't leave family behind." 3 hours before the Vanguard dropped out of hyperspace, First Lieutenant Ethan Cole sat alone in his fighter cockpit, running his thumb over the edge of a photograph clipped to the dash a Euro. His grandfather, Daniel Cole, in a flight suit 40 years younger than the man Ethan remembered from bedtime stories. "No pressure, right, old man?" Ethan muttered. The whole fleet knew who he was. Everyone had an opinion about it. Some pilots treated him like royalty, which he hated. Some treated him like a target to prove themselves against, which he hated more. All Ethan wanted was to fly his ship, do his job, and not get anybody killed on his watch. His wingmate, a loud, easygoing Texan named Danny Ossie, leaned over the comm with his usual grin plastered on. "Yo, Cole, y'all ready to make some history? Or you gonna sit here talking to a picture all day?" "Just checking my 6, Ethan said, tucking the photo away. "Your 6 is me, brother. Always has been." Danny's voice dropped, just slightly, just enough to be real for a second. "Look, Manna, nobody expects you to be your grandpa. We just need you to be you. That's plenty." Admiral Voss's voice cut across the fleet-wide channel before Ethan could answer, crisp and steady, despite everything riding on the next 20 minutes. "All hands, this is Voss. New Hendricks militia is holding by a thread. 8,000 civilians already got out because 400 farmers refused to run. We are not going to let that sacrifice mean nothing." A pause. The whole bridge of the Vanguard, the whole fleet, could feel what was coming. 40 years ago, humanity got told we didn't belong out here. We answered that question once already. Looks like somebody needs a refresher course. Cheers rippled across the comm channels a Euro, rowdy, defiant, very much not by the book. Danny whooped loud enough to blow out his own psyche. Ethan found himself grinning despite the knot in his stomach. "Ozzy?" Voss added, almost amused. "Control your enthusiasm before you deafen the whole squadron." "Copy that, Admiral." "Can't promise anything." Ethan checked his weapon systems one last time, closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, and thought about a farming colony full of people who didn't run when they had every reason to. "All right," he said, mostly to himself. "Let's go bring 'em home." The Vanguard dropped out of hyperspace, and New Hendrix's sky filled with coalition ships. General Kesh's fleet outnumbered the coalition force nearly 5 to 1, and for the first 10 minutes of the battle, that math looked like it was going to hold. Coalition fighters screamed through the atmosphere in tight formations. Ethan and Danny weaving through anti-air fire thick enough to walk on, trying to punch a hole toward the packed ships pounding what was left of Millbrook. Above them, the Vanguard traded broadsides with a battlecruiser twice its size, hull plating glowing white-hot under sustained fire. "Admiral, shields down to 60%. The tactical officer shouted over the noise on the bridge. "Then we make 60% count," Voss said, gripping the rail, eyes locked on the tactical display. "Helm, bring us between that cruiser and the colony. Give the ground teams cover." It was a brutal, grinding fight of Euros. No easy wins, no lucky breaks. Packed ships had better numbers and heavier armor. What they didn't have was 400 farmers who'd already proven they wouldn't quit, and a fleet that had spent 40 years training for exactly this nightmare. Down on the surface, Jake Ramirez watched coalition dropships finally punch through the atmosphere, delivering Marines and heavy weapons to what was left of his exhausted militia line. "'Bout damn time," he muttered, then grinned for the first time in 6 hours. "All right, people, on your feet. Cavalry's here a Euro, let's give 'em a warm welcome." In orbit, Ethan's squadron carved a path through packed fighters with the kind of precision that came from training, not luck, drawing 3 enemy squadrons into a tight formation right where the Vanguard's point defense guns wanted them. Danny whooped every time a packed fighter went up in flame. "That's 5 for me, Cole. You're falling behind." Focus on flying, Osei, not scoring. But even as the tide started turning on the ground, General Kesh wasn't done. From his flagship, he watched the battle sour and made the call every arrogant commander eventually makes. "Bring up the second wave," he ordered coldly. "Full force. I don't care about casualties. I want that colony and that fleet broken by nightfall." Behind his battlecruiser, a second, larger wave of packed warships began charging out of the asteroid field they'd been hiding in a Euros twice the size of the first wave, weapons already hot. Admiral Voss saw them on her display and felt her stomach drop. That's their real fleet, she said quietly. Everything up to now was just the opening move. The second packed wave hit like a hammer, and for a brutal stretch of minutes, the coalition fleet bent hard under the pressure. 2 frigates went dark. A cruiser lost its whole starboard weapons array. Ethan pulled his fighter through a barrel roll so tight, his vision blurred, dodging fire from 3 directions at once. "Admiral, we're taking heavy losses," the tactical officer said, voice tight. "Recommend fallback to defensive Euros." "No." Voss's voice didn't waver. "We don't run. Not today, not ever." She'd said that phrase her whole career without really feeling the weight of it. Now, watching her fleet get hammered above a colony that refused to give up on the ground, she felt every ounce of it. "Get me Ramirez's militia and every dropship crew still flying," she ordered. "I want the Anvil formation. Now." The Anvil wasn't some secret superweapon a Euro, no hidden tech, no miracle device. It was something simpler and, in its own way, scarier. 40 years of coalition doctrine built specifically around the lessons of Perch Station. Every ship, every fighter squadron, every ground unit converging into overlapping fields of fire, funneling an enemy fleet into a kill zone with nowhere left to run. It required total coordination, total trust. It required exactly the kind of stubborn, refused to quit teamwork that New Hendrix's militia had already shown for 6 straight hours. "Ozzy, Cole, form up with 2nd Squadron," Voss ordered. "Ground teams, hold that funnel point. Everybody else, converge on my mark." Down below, Jake Ramirez heard the order come through and turned to what was left of his exhausted volunteers, a Euros, farmers, shopkeepers, teenagers who'd never fired a real weapon before today. "Y'all heard the Admiral," he said, voice rough but steady. "One more push. One more, and we send these bastards home crying." A ragged cheer answered him, not confident, not fearless, just determined. Up in orbit, General Kesh watched his second wave push the coalition fleet into a tightening formation and mistook it for desperation. "They're clustering because they're breaking," he told his officers, satisfaction creeping into his voice. "Finish them." He didn't recognize the shape his own fleet was being herded into. He didn't know the name Perch Station. He didn't know he was flying his entire armada straight into the exact same trap that broke the Korath Dominion 40 years ago. Admiral Voss watched the packed fleet slide perfectly into position and allowed herself one small, grim smile. 60 seconds, she said. "Everybody, get ready." 60 seconds felt like an hour. On the Vanguard's bridge, nobody spoke. The tactical display showed the threshold-packed fleet fully committed, funneled between the colony's mountain range and the coalition line, exactly where 40 years of doctrine said they needed to be. Ethan's hands were steady on his controls, but his heart wasn't. Beside him, Danny had gone quiet for the first time all day a Euro, no jokes, no trash talk, just focus. "Hey Cole," Danny said softly over the private channel. "Yeah? Whatever happens a Euros. Good flying with you, brother." "Same," Ethan said. "Now let's finish this." He thought about all the pilots who'd sat in this exact seat before him, going back generations, and realized for the first time that fear didn't go away when you understood what you were fighting for. It just got quieter, pushed down underneath everything else that mattered more. Down on the ground, Jake Ramirez stood at the front of his militia line, watching the sky light up with weapons fire, and thought about every person from Millbrook and Ashford who'd made it onto those evacuation ships because his people refused to fold. Whatever happened next, that part was already a win. On the bridge, Admiral Voss opened a channel a Euro, not just to her own fleet, but a wide-open broadcast, unencrypted, aimed straight at General Kesh's flagship. She wanted him to hear this. She wanted every packed ship in that fleet to hear it. Her voice was calm, steady, absolutely certain. "General Kesh. This is Admiral Sarah Voss, United Earth Coalition. 40 years ago, my mentor told an armada exactly like yours, something I don't think you were around to hear." On his flagship, Draven Kesh frowned at the incoming transmission, more curious than concerned. "A speech. How predictable." "We don't run," Voss said. "Not from Dominion ships. Not from packed ships. Not from anybody who thinks a farming colony full of good people is an easy target." She glanced at her tactical display, watched the Anvil formation lock fully into place around the entire packed fleet, and gave the order in the same breath. "All ships a Euro fire." The word landed like a thunderclap across every coalition channel, and for one suspended half-second, the entire battlefield held its breath a Euros. Every pilot, every gunner, every exhausted militia volunteer on the ground below. All of them locked in the same fraction of a second, waiting for the world to tip one way or the other. Then the sky came apart. The anvil closed like a fist, Coalition ships opened fire from every angle at once, turning what General Kesh thought was a battle of numbers into a lesson in geometry. His fleet had the mass, but they didn't have the room. A Euro packed tight in the funnel, unable to maneuver, unable to retreat, without tearing their own formation apart. Ethan and Danny led their squadrons straight through the gap in the packed line, hammering engine sections and weapons arrays with textbook precision. On the ground, Jake's militia turned every remaining anti-air gun on the dropships trying to flee, refusing to let a single packed unit make it back to orbit clean. On his flagship, Draven Kesh watched his armada come apart in real time. A Euros, ship after ship losing power, losing weapons, losing the will to keep fighting. A Euros, and felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years of climbing the pack's command ladder. Fear. Fall back, he finally screamed at his own bridge crew. All ships, fall back now. But it was too late for orders. His fleet was already breaking apart, ships scattering in every direction that wasn't straight into coalition guns. Discipline gone, formation gone. The invasion that was supposed to prove humanity was just people collapsing into total, humiliating rout. Admiral Voss watched it happen from the Vanguard's bridge without a hint of celebration in her face. Just quiet, hard-earned resolve. Admiral, her tactical officer said, packed flagship is retreating. Should we pursue? Voss thought of Jake Ramirez's militia, of 8,000 evacuated civilians, of a comms officer on the Meridian who sent 4 words with his last 30 seconds of life. No, she said finally. Let them run home and tell everyone exactly what happened here. On the surface, Jake Ramirez watched the packed fleet break apart in the sky above New Hendrix and finally let himself sit down on a burned-out fence post, exhausted beyond words. Priya, he said into his radio, voice cracking with relief, tell the Admiral thanks for the assist. Up in his retreating flagship, General Draven Kesh stared at the wreckage of his once proud armada and understood, far too late, exactly what every species that came before him had already learned the hard way. The stories weren't exaggerated. They were, if anything, understated. Humanity didn't run. And now, so help him, neither would the fear that was about to spread through every corner of Threshold pack space. 3 weeks later, on a rebuilt landing pad in Millbrook, New Hendrix held a ceremony that made every major news feed across Coalition space. Jake Ramirez stood awkwardly in a dress uniform 2 sizes too formal for a farmtown militia sergeant, while Admiral Sarah Voss pinned a Coalition Valor Medal to his chest in front of what was left of his 400 volunteers. A Euros, 312 of whom made it through, a number that would haunt and humble him for the rest of his life. You didn't wait for us, Voss told him quietly before the cameras rolled. You held the line when you had every reason to run. That's the whole story, right there. Just did what needed doing, ma'am, Jake said. Same as anybody would. That's exactly what my mentor said 40 years ago, Voss replied, smiling for the first time in weeks. Funny how that keeps happening. Nearby, Ethan Cole stood with Danny Ossie, both of them a little banged up, both of them alive, watching the ceremony with the kind of quiet pride that didn't need announcing. Ethan glanced down at the worn photograph of his grandfather, still clipped inside his flight jacket. Think he'd be proud, old man, he murmured. Danny clapped him on the shoulder. Brother, entire galaxy's about to know your name for the exact same reason they knew his. That's a pretty solid answer. Far across Threshold pack space, General Draven Kesh stood before his own council. A Euro, the very same one he dismissed weeks earlier. A Euro, and delivered a report he never imagined having to give. The humans are not a myth, he admitted, voice flat with the weight of it. They are not lucky. They are not desperate animals fighting past their limits. They are simply a species that has decided, absolutely and completely, that they will not be moved. Attacking them was the worst mistake of my career. Word spread fast after that. A Euros, not just through the pact, but across a dozen neighboring systems, retold in 100 languages, exaggerated in some places, understated in others, but always landing on the same unshakable truth. 40 years ago, humanity said 3 words at Perch Station, and an empire broke. Now, at New Hendrix, they'd said it again. Euro, and another one had broken just the same. Every species in the galaxy updated their files that season. Every strategist redrew their maps to keep human space firmly, permanently marked as do not touch, because somewhere out among the stars, humanity was still listening, and they were always ready to say it a third time. We don't run,